Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the US Futures weekly chart analysis for the week ending 22nd of August 2025. The first chart is the US dollar index futures, which closed just slightly lower this week. There was an attempt for the market to push higher and back into the longer term trading range, but eventually it did fail and it moved just back below it again. It's only minor weakness at this point. Volume was reduced as price pushed lower, but it also reflects the lack of intent as price attempted to recover this week. There was economic news due to be released late in the week this week, so for a large part, this market and all the US markets in particular were trading in a lackluster fashion, waiting for that economic news to be released. And that may reflect the lower volume this week, as the market was trading roughly sideways and with little intent for most of the week. But when that news was released, the market has pushed lower and closed just fractionally below the previous close and the lows of the longer term trading range, suggesting this attempt to recover back into that important zone may not materialise. We'll just see how the market trades in response early next week. Further downside follow through, especially earlier in the week, and especially if spreads do increase towards the downside, you would suggest this attempt to recover will fail. We'll just wait and see, at least for early in the week next week, before we make any serious decisions. This is E-mini S&P. This is S&P 500 index futures. And they spent a lot of the week in consolidation mode, as you could probably understand, with that economic news expected to be released late in the week. So the trading was below the previous bar's close. A slight increase in volume, but about average overall. So this was genuine trading. The market was defending against supply, and it eventually closed back up pretty much adjacent to the previous close. So that was a good response, and it leaves this market well placed to make an attempt to continue higher if trading conditions continue to be favourable next week. US Treasury 10-year note futures, and they closed slightly higher this week. Prices pushed back up to this level, which is the highs of this bar. And you can see over the last 3 weeks, this market's really been trading in consolidation mode following this push higher here. You've effectively got a bull flag of some description. If you're looking at classical technical analysis, volume increased this week to slightly above the average, but not excessively so. So I don't think there's any great danger in that as far as supply goes. It'll be interesting to see if this market's strong enough to push higher next week. Trading remains within the range of this widespread down bar. I don't think there'll be any great trending until the market breaks above or below this level. Copper price futures. Copper price futures are consolidating at the lows of this widespread down bar, which was the expectation. The market came back a little this week with a narrow spread on low volume. That suggests that selling pressure was quite low this week. If any intent or increased demand does emerge in this market, it would be far easier for it to push higher now than push lower. It doesn't appear there's any great amount of selling pressure in this market. And I expect this market will trade either sideways or attempt to push higher, depending on the trading conditions. Gold price futures. Gold price futures traded higher in the end this week. It did come back for a period and traded in consolidation mode below the previous bar's close before just pushing higher later in the week. This suggests there is demand increasing in the market. There's relative safety in this sideways zone here. The deeper it pushes into that sideways zone, it appears that selling pressure reduces and the pressure comes out of the market. That allows the market to find some support and then push back up towards the highs of the range. Supply has been drawn out at this level above the highs of the range, but I expect the market will attempt to push up this coming week and just test the market for supply again, perhaps pop its head just above that level and see how much supply is actually drawn out. Silver price futures. Silver price futures acted stronger than gold again this week. They've pushed higher and above this previous up bar's high just slightly. It's nowhere near a breakout, but it's testing the highs of the range for strength just to see how much supply will be drawn out. I expect the market will pop itself up like this early next week and just see how much supply is drawn out. If supply is low, it'll probably continue higher. And if supply is drawn out, you'll probably get a period of consolidation just in there, fairly high in this up bars range. Light crude price futures are trading sideways to a large degree, which is what we expected down here towards the lows of the range. Sideways was the expectation. There is supply above this level. There is demand increasing at this level. So this is the sweet spot in the middle here. And I expect the market will continue in there, at least for this period of time. It doesn't seem like there's any great intent to move lower. And just the same, there's no great intent to move higher. Not at this point anyway. We'll wait for something to develop in this market before anything really serious changes. Into the currencies now. This is the Euro-US dollar currency pair, which to a large degree traded the inverse of the US dollar, and it traded in consolidation mode this week. Below the previous bar's close, just to eventually close adjacent to the previous bar's close. The market does look poised to move higher, which would suggest the US dollar will continue lower. It's certainly well placed to do so. Volume was below the average and reduced over the previous bar's volume, which in itself was consolidating to a fair degree as well. So this market does look well placed to at least make an attempt to push higher, and that does suggest that the US dollar will continue lower. This is British pound currency futures, and they also traded in consolidation mode this week, below the previous bar's close. The market did finish up near the highs for the week and just below this important level. Volume was slightly increased but well below the average. So selling pressure remains below the average, and that leaves this market also well placed to make an attempt to push higher if there is ongoing weakness in the US dollar. Japanese yen currency futures, similar in some respects to the two previous charts. This market traded in consolidation mode for a large part of this week's trading below the previous bar's close, before just pushing higher towards the end of the week on low and below average volume. Selling pressure wasn't drawn out as the market pulled back in consolidation mode. That allowed the market just to pop up and close adjacent to the previous bar's close, trading the inverse of the US dollar to a large degree and remaining well placed to make an attempt to push higher in response. If this market does push higher, I expect there will be some resistance found at this level. Aussie dollar currency futures, and they've dropped out to a large degree of that channel which we had marked in here. This looked like bullish absorption at the time, but if it was, it's failed and it's dropped out. What the market's doing now is really trading sideways it did not want to continue higher like this for whatever reason. And despite the weakness in the US dollar, this market continuing to trade sideways down here. It's dropped out of the channel, but it hasn't really broken down. It's trading sideways. It's traded sideways for the last month. Pretty much adjacent to this 65-cent level. Some support was found this week. Volume did increase slightly, but remained below the average. Price pulled back in consolidation mode, but closed well off the week's lows, suggesting there was some demand in the market. And prices stabilised to a large degree around the 65-cent level. Bitcoin futures. Bitcoin futures did see some supply drawn out the previous week. We noted that at the time, where volume increased to the average. Price attempted to break out and move higher, but failed and ended up closing pretty close to the lows for the week. In response, this market pulled back. It's effectively tested for supply. It's pulled back, traded below the previous bar's close, only to find support after it tagged this important all-time highs or previous all-time highs level. And the market's closed back off its lows and back almost adjacent to the previous bar's close. What you've got is a mirror image of the previous bar where supply was drawn out, and this week prices pulled back and then recovered to suggest that buying support is present in the market. I would expect this market will attempt to push higher in response, and a push above this level would probably be significant, and that's pretty close to the 120 level. So keep an eye on that level. The market did draw out some supply. It's tested that supply and recovered. That's effectively defending against supply, absorbing the supply in the market or buying it. And generally what you'll see is at least an attempt to push higher in response. It may not be successful, but there'll be an attempt to push higher to some degree. If that is successful, or at least initially, watch for the market to come back and test this level, the 120 for strength, before it pushes away again. Just back to the US dollar index futures quickly before we wrap up. You can see the market has pulled back this week. It's closed pretty much adjacent to the previous bar's lows. This is the important level here. You could mark it there if you really wanted, but you've got a level there. It's just below the 97 level. A clear break and close below that level would be significant. Prior to that, any sideways trading in here is trading in the shadow of the lows of the range. And if there's no supply drawn out, the market can continue sideways for quite some time at a level like this, if there's no supply being drawn out for any reason. The other currency charts did suggest this market will push lower. That's only inferring it'll push lower at this point. Just wait to see for the actual response. Because if there is a breakdown like this, you'll often see an attempt to recover and then the failure. And that's when the market will likely fail. Okay, thanks for your time. Back again next week. See ya.